Hey folks, it's time for week 45 in our 2025 chronological Bible readings. This week we're in Luke chapters 18 through 21, Matthew chapters 19 through 25, Mark chapters 10 through 13, but just one chapter in the Gospel of John, and that will be John chapter 12. Great stuff there, I promise. I'm going to do this summary type video again just because so much of the material is repeated in the gospel accounts. So let's look at Matthew 19 and that it corresponds with Mark chapter 10. Then Matthew 21 is going to correspond with Mark 11, Luke 19, and it will correspond to John chapter 12. And then finally, Matthew chapters 24 and 25 are going to correspond with Mark 13 and then Luke chapter 21. And that's going to cover what is known as the Olivet Discourse. I'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. But here's some things you're going to read about. Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. Of course, part of that is fulfilling a prophecy from Zechariah just about 5 centuries earlier. And Jesus will come into Jerusalem on a colt, just like the prophet said he would. And then, what about that Olivet Discourse? Well, one day after Jesus leaves the temple area, he goes to what is known as the Mount of Olives. And he gives some very serious and sobering teachings there pertaining to what was going to come. Now, some of that happens in AD 70, but then there's more to come at the very end of time. So, I don't hold to what is called full preterist view. I think that's a bad view, seriously bad. I'll move on now. But Jesus is having more public teachings there in Jerusalem, and he's very pinpointed and precise on calling out the chief priests and the Pharisees and their scribes. And they know it. They realize what he's doing, and that just fuels their fire all the more to carry out what they're about to carry out. We're right there near the very end of his life, folks. But don't worry, because after the cross, there is the tomb that is vacated by the risen Christ. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me touch briefly on John chapter 12. This is after Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. And that's actually leading up a few weeks before his last week. But I wanted to make a point that the anointing that one of Lazarus' sister does, that one being Mary, that anointing of Jesus is different from the one mentioned in Luke chapter 7. That one occurs up in Galilee in the midst of his ministry. This one in John 12 is at the very end of his ministry, the very end of his life, and it's in Jerusalem. So 2 separate anointings, not the same. So no, the gospel writers aren't mistaken. That's not a synoptic problem. It's just 2 different anointings, much like the temple cleansings that you'll also read about. John speaks of one that happens at the beginning. Matthew, Mark, and Luke talk about the one at the end. All right. That should be sufficient for this week. I hope that as you are reading the Word, you are beholding God and you are rejoicing in who He is. Folks, don't just read the material. Behold the God who is responsible for it. He is worthy to be worshiped. And I pray that that's what we're doing. Until next time, God's grace to you.